My stepmom gaslit my dad into thinking I was crazy until I caught her confession on tape. 3 years later, she's standing outside my school smiling like she won. I'd always thought my stepmom Lydia always meant well. Sure, she could be harsh, but whenever she threw out a sarcastic jab at me, I'd just brush it off. I convinced myself that it was our weird little language. Her remarks about my interesting style or how adorably awkward I was at social events always came with an apology afterward and a quick, nervous laugh. Over time, I told myself it was just how she coped with stress, so I accepted it. But last Christmas, Lydia asked if I could host our family holiday gathering. She said she wanted us to bond. I thought it was a sweet gesture. Lydia had always been the one in charge of holidays, perfect centerpieces, gourmet dinners, and coordinated outfits. But this year, she seemed genuinely eager for me to take the lead. My dad smiled in the corner, and I knew it was a chance for the family I always wanted. So over the next few weeks, I did everything. I planned the menu, tested complicated recipes, decorated the entire house, and handpicked thoughtful presents for each family member. Lydia mostly watched, critiquing gently and offering tiny tweaks. Sometimes her tips felt more like subtle jabs, but she'd quickly follow up with an anxious giggle and an apology. "Are you sure you're going with that wrapping paper?" she said one night, eyebrows raised. "It's very festive, maybe too festive for your taste." I shrugged it off. That was just Lydia being Lydia. On Christmas Eve, family poured into our house, and Lydia basked in their praises. "Oh, it wasn't a big deal at all," she kept saying modestly, smiling at me like we shared a precious secret. I felt a small pang, but I figured our bonding was worth a little ego sacrifice. Then Christmas dinner came, and Lydia's friends showed up. They were the type to spend their Sunday evenings at charity galas or high-end auctions, pearl necklaces, gold watches, very put together. As they flooded the dining room, Lydia pulled me aside, her fingers tight on my elbow. "Remember, honey, they think I did this," she whispered sharply. "You understand why, right?" I swallowed my frustration, nodded, and smiled. The dinner started off smoothly, and for a moment I actually felt accepted. Lydia's circle complimented her relentlessly, and even though I was invisible to them, seeing her happy somehow felt like my win too. I sat quietly, proud of the work I'd done. But then, when it came time to exchange gifts, Lydia's nerves got the better of her, and instead of smoking a cigarette or even just taking a deep breath, she decided to bully me. She lifted the box I'd given her, a beautiful silk scarf I'd saved months to buy. "Oh, Ava," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is so quaint. Did you get it from one of those cute little thrift stores you like so much?" Everyone stared. My throat tightened, but I smiled weakly, trying to play it cool. "And her outfit," Lydia continued, turning toward her guests. "She has such a unique sense of style. Isn't it so refreshing?" The chuckles around the table weren't loud, but they stung like needles. And just when I thought it was over, she pointed to the intricate cranberry tart I'd made while announced, "And now, everyone, you must try my famous tart. I slaved like an N-word for hours making it." Something in me snapped. My voice, which I'd always kept quiet around Lydia's friends, rose confidently. "Oh, Lydia, why don't you show them how you made it? After all, you did slave away." "Oh, Ava, you're hilarious. Everyone knows No, seriously," I interrupted calmly. "We'd all love to see you demonstrate the recipe you worked so hard on. It's pretty complicated." The table went quiet. Lydia stared at me, her eyes begging me to stop. I didn't. "Go on, Lydia," one of her friends said cheerfully. "It sounds delightful." Cornered, Lydia rose unsteadily, walking over to the kitchen island. Her hands shook as she gathered ingredients randomly, pretending to know exactly what she was doing. I stood back, arms crossed, as she fumbled with the dough and clumsily dropped spoons. Everyone's smiles turned confused, their polite laughs fading as they realized she had no clue. Flour dusted her expensive blouse, cranberry juice splattered everywhere, and eventually, she just stood there. The silence hung heavy. "Okay," she finally whispered, voice shaking. "Ava did everything. All of it." Slowly, everyone's eyes shifted toward me. Lydia's friends looked stunned, then softened. They murmured apologies and praised my efforts genuinely, clearly embarrassed they'd ignored me earlier. My dad hugged me tightly, warmth and validation washing over me. Later that night, after everyone had gone, Lydia approached my room, knocking softly. I opened the door reluctantly. "You think your father would ever choose you over me?" she said. And just before I could respond, she hit me across the head. I stumbled backward and grabbed the doorframe. My ears rang, and I couldn't believe what just happened. She stood there with her hand still raised and her face twisted with rage. Then, like flipping a switch, her expression changed. Her eyes went wide and she covered her mouth. She started crying and saying she didn't mean to do it. She said I made her so angry and she lost control. I touched my head where she hit me. It throbbed and I felt dizzy. She reached out like she wanted to help, but I backed away. She kept apologizing and begging me not to tell my dad. She said it would destroy our family. She said she was just stressed from the dinner and I embarrassed her in front of everyone. I didn't know what to say. My head hurt and I felt confused. Part of me wanted to scream for my dad, but another part worried she was right about destroying our family. She must have seen my hesitation because she straightened up. She wiped her tears and smoothed her hair. She told me to think about what I wanted to happen next. She said my dad was happy and asked if I really wanted to ruin that. Then she left. I closed my door and sat on my bed. My hands shook as I texted my best friend Madison about what happened. She told me to tell my dad immediately, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The next morning, I came downstairs and Lydia was making breakfast. She smiled at me like nothing happened. My dad sat at the table reading his tablet and drinking coffee. She asked how I slept and if I wanted pancakes. I mumbled something about not being hungry. My dad looked up and asked if I was okay. Before I could answer, Lydia jumped in. She said I was probably tired from all the work I did yesterday. She praised me for helping with dinner and said she was so proud of me. My dad smiled and agreed. He said he was impressed with everything I accomplished. He had no idea about what happened after everyone left. I went back to my room and stayed there most of the day. I kept replaying the moment she hit me. I wondered if I imagined how hard it was. Maybe I was overreacting. But then I looked in the mirror and saw a faint bruise forming. It wasn't huge, but it was there. Proof that it really happened. Over the next few days, Lydia acted extra nice to me. She bought me little gifts and complimented everything I did. She even offered to take me shopping for new clothes. I played along because I didn't know what else to do. My dad seemed happy that we were getting along so well. He mentioned how glad he was that we bonded over Christmas. But at night, I'd lie awake thinking about her question. Would my father ever choose me over her? The way she said it made me think she already knew the answer. A week after Christmas, I finally worked up the courage to talk to my dad. I waited until Lydia went to her book club. I sat him down in the living room and took a deep breath. I started to tell him about Christmas night, but he interrupted me. He said Lydia already talked to him. She She told him I was upset about the dinner and said some hurtful things to her. I stared at him in shock. I asked what she told him exactly. He sighed and said she mentioned I accused her of taking credit for my work. He said she admitted she should have been clearer with her friends about who did what, but he also said I needed to understand that embarrassing her in front of everyone wasn't the right way to handle it. I tried to explain that wasn't all that happened, but he held up his hand. He said we all said things we didn't mean when we were angry. He suggested I apologize to Lydia and we could move forward. I felt my stomach drop. She got to him first and controlled the whole narrative. I wanted to scream that she hit me, but looking at his face, I knew he wouldn't believe me. So I nodded and said I'd think about it. He patted my shoulder and said he knew I'd do the right thing. That night at dinner, Lydia smiled at me across the table. She asked if my dad and I had a nice chat. The look in her eyes told me she knew exactly how it went. I started documenting everything after that, every comment she made and every weird look she gave me. I bought a small notebook and kept it hidden in my backpack. I didn't know what else to do. The next few weeks were strange. Lydia would be sweet when my dad was around, but cold when we were alone. She'd make little comments about how I should be grateful she didn't tell him the whole truth about Christmas night. One morning I came down for breakfast and found her going through my phone. She looked up casually and said she was just checking if I needed a new case. I grabbed it from her and she laughed like it was funny. My dad walked in right then and asked what was going on. Lydia said she was helping me pick out phone accessories. He smiled and said that was nice of her. I started keeping my phone with me at all times after that. I even slept with it under my pillow, but somehow she still found ways to mess with me. I'd come home from school and find things moved in my room. Nothing major, but enough to let me know she'd been there. My homework would be in different spots or my clothes rearranged in my closet. When I mentioned it to my dad, he said I was probably just forgetful. He reminded me about the time I lost my car keys for 3 days. Lydia nodded sympathetically and offered to help me get organized. Then the food thing started. I've been allergic to shellfish since I was little. Not deathly allergic, but enough to make me really sick. Everyone in the family knew about it. One night, Lydia made pasta with what she said was regular marinara sauce. I took a few bites and my mouth started tingling. I recognized the feeling immediately and stopped eating. I asked if there was shellfish in the sauce. She looked shocked and said of course not. She said she would never do that, but I knew that tingling feeling. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. Sure enough, my lips were starting to swell. I took some Benadryl from the medicine cabinet and waited for it to kick in. When I came back to the table, Lydia was telling my dad how I barely touched my food. She wondered aloud if I was developing an eating disorder. My dad looked concerned and asked if everything was okay. I said I wasn't feeling well and went to my room. Later, I snuck down and checked the trash. I found an empty jar of sauce with shrimp listed in the ingredients. The next day, I started being more careful. I'd watch her cook and double-check labels. Sometimes I'd say I already ate or make my own food. Lydia noticed and started making comments about me being difficult. She told my dad I was rejecting her attempts to bond. She said she was trying so hard, but I kept pushing her away. My dad pulled me aside and asked me to make more effort. He said Lydia was really trying and I should meet her halfway. I wanted to tell him about the shellfish, but I had no proof anymore. So I started pretending to eat her food. I'd push it around my plate and take tiny bites of things I knew were safe. Then I'd sneak down later and make a sandwich. But Lydia caught on. One night, she stood over me while I ate and watched every bite. She said she worked hard on dinner and wanted to make sure I enjoyed it. I forced myself to eat even though my stomach churned. Nothing happened that time, but I stayed on edge waiting for the tingling to start. A few days later, I woke up feeling awful. My stomach cramped and I could barely get out of bed. I missed school and spent the day in the bathroom. Lydia brought me tea and acted concerned. She said there must be a bug going around. But when my dad wasn't looking, she smiled at me in this knowing way. This went on for weeks. I'd feel fine for a few days, then suddenly get sick. Always after eating something she made. I started losing weight and my dad noticed. He wanted to take me to the doctor, but Lydia suggested we wait and see if it passed. She said it was probably just stress from school. She offered to make me special bland foods to help my stomach. I knew I needed proof, so I started switching our plates when she wasn't looking. It was risky, but I had to try something. The first time I did it, nothing happened. We both ate normally, and I wondered if I was being paranoid. Maybe I really was just stressed, but the second time was different. I switched our plates while she was getting drinks. Halfway through dinner, she suddenly stopped eating. Her face went pale and she excused herself. I heard her in the bathroom getting sick. When she came back, she pushed her plate away and said she wasn't hungry. My dad asked if she was okay, and she said she felt a bit off. I kept switching plates after that. Sometimes nothing happened, but other times she'd get sick. I documented every incident in my notebook with dates and times. Meanwhile, she was working on my dad. She'd cry to him about how hard she was trying with me. She said I was cold and distant and nothing she did was good enough. He started getting frustrated with me. He'd make comments about my attitude and how I needed to be more appreciative. He said Lydia was doing her best and I should recognize that. I felt so alone. My best friend Madison tried to help, but there wasn't much she could do. She said I should tell another adult, but who would believe me? Lydia was too smart to leave evidence. Then came the jewelry incident. Lydia had this expensive bracelet her mother gave her. She wore it all the time and made a big deal about how special it was. One day she came crying to my dad that it was missing. She said she left it on her dresser and now it was gone. They looked everywhere for it. Then Lydia suggested checking my room. She said she hated to even think it, but maybe I took it by accident. My dad looked uncomfortable but agreed to check. I knew right then what was happening. I said they could search my room because I had nothing to hide, but my heart pounded as we walked upstairs. Lydia went straight to my desk drawer like she knew exactly where to look, and there it was wrapped in one of my scarves, the bracelet I'd never touched. My dad's face fell. He asked me how it got there. I said I had no idea and that Lydia must have put it there. But even as I said it, I knew how it sounded. Lydia started crying harder. She said she couldn't believe I would steal from her and then blame her for it. She said she thought we were making progress. My dad sent me to my room while they talked. I could hear Lydia sobbing and saying she didn't know what to do. She said maybe I needed therapy or something. When my dad finally came to my room, he looked exhausted. He said he was disappointed in me. He said stealing was bad enough, but lying about it was worse. I tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. He said I was grounded and took my phone. He said I needed to think about my actions and apologize to Lydia when I was ready. I spent the next week basically trapped. No phone and no car and no friends over. Lydia would bring me meals with this fake concerned look. She'd ask if I was ready to talk about why I took her bracelet. I started planning. If she wanted to play games, then I'd play too. I just needed to be smarter about it. I apologized to her one morning when my dad was at work. I made myself cry and said I didn't know why I took the bracelet. I said I was jealous of her relationship with my dad. She ate it up. She hugged me and said she understood. She said we could work through this together. She even convinced my dad to give me my phone back. back. But I wasn't done. I kept documenting everything and being extra careful. I also started recording our conversations on my phone when my dad wasn't around. One night, she came to my room to chat. She sat on my bed and asked how I was doing. I had my phone recording in my pocket. I played along and said I was trying to be better. I said I appreciated her patience with me. Then I asked why she put shellfish in my food. She laughed and said I was being paranoid. She said she would never do that. But then she leaned in close and whispered that I should be more careful with my accusations. I asked what she meant. She said my dad was already worried about my mental health. She said if I kept making wild claims, he might think I needed professional help. Then she mentioned a treatment center her friend's daughter went to. She said it really helped with her behavioral issues. She said it was in another state, but they had great results. I felt cold all over. She was threatening to have me sent away. I asked if that's what she wanted. She smiled and said she wanted us to be a happy family. She said that was easier when everyone knew their place. Then she patted my hand and left. I listened to the recording later, but her whispered threats were too quiet to hear clearly. All you could make out was her saying she cared about me and wanted to help. I knew I needed something bigger, some kind of proof that my dad couldn't ignore or explain away. So I started setting a trap. I told Lydia I felt bad about Christmas. I said I wanted to make it up to her by cooking a special dinner for her birthday, just the three of us. She looked suspicious at first, but I kept pushing. I said I wanted to show her I could be part of the family. I even asked for her help planning the menu. We spent a week preparing. I let her supervise everything and followed all her suggestions. I acted grateful for her guidance and thanked her constantly. The night of her birthday, I cooked everything perfectly. I made her favorite dishes and even decorated the dining room. My dad was thrilled that we were getting along, but I had switched two of the serving dishes. The one I gave Lydia had the ingredients she'd been putting in my food. Nothing dangerous, but enough to make her sick. We sat down to eat and I watched her carefully. She took a few bites and then paused. Her face changed and she put down her fork. My dad asked if everything was okay. She said the food tasted strange. I asked what was wrong with it and took a bite from my own plate. I said it tasted fine to me. I asked if maybe she was feeling sick. She glared at me but couldn't say anything without admitting what she'd done. She excused herself and went to the bathroom. My dad and I could hear her getting sick. When she came back, she looked pale and angry. She said she needed to lie down. My dad offered to help, but she waved him off. As she passed my chair, she grabbed my shoulder hard enough to hurt. Later that night, my dad knocked on my door. He said Lydia was really sick and he was worried. He asked if I was sure the food was okay. I said I felt fine and so did he. I suggested maybe she had a stomach bug. He nodded but looked troubled. The next morning, Lydia was still in bed. My dad brought her tea and toast, but she couldn't keep anything down. He wanted to take her to the doctor, but she refused. I heard them arguing about it. She kept saying she was fine and just needed rest, but my dad said she looked terrible and needed help. Finally, she agreed to go. While they were gone, I searched their room. I found her stash of shellfish powder hidden in a shoebox. I took pictures of everything. I also found other things. Printed emails about boarding schools and treatment centers, brochures for places that promised to fix troubled teens, all dated from the last few months. When they got back from the doctor, Lydia went straight to bed. My dad said they ran tests but couldn't find anything wrong. The doctor thought it might be food poisoning. I suggested we throw out all the old spices and check expiration dates. I said we should be extra careful about food safety. My dad agreed and said that was a good idea. While he was at work the next day, I helped Lydia clean out the kitchen. I made sure to find her hidden shellfish powder and acted shocked. I asked what it was doing there. She snatched it from me and said it must be old. She threw it in the trash and told me not to mention it to my dad, but I'd already taken pictures. I had evidence now. I just needed the right moment to use it. Lydia must have sensed something was changing because she got more desperate. She started telling my dad I was skipping school and hanging out with bad kids. I showed him my perfect attendance record, but he still looked worried. Lydia suggested maybe I was forging documents. She said teens could do anything with computers these days. She also started intercepting my mail. I caught her going through college brochures that came for me. When I confronted her, she said she was just trying to help me organize. Then she started deleting my voicemails. My friend Madison called to say she'd left me 3 messages I never got. My dad had called too, but I never heard the phone ring. I realized she was isolating me, making it harder for me to communicate with anyone. Even my teachers started asking if everything was okay at home. One day I came home to find her in my room with my notebook, the one where I documented everything. She looked up when I walked in and smiled. She said she was concerned about my mental health. She said the paranoid writings in my notebook proved I needed help. She already had pages photographed on her phone. I lunged for the notebook, but she held it away. She said my dad needed to see what I'd been writing. She said it would help him understand why I needed treatment. I knew I was running out of time. If she showed him that notebook out of context, he'd think I was losing it. All my documentation would look like paranoid rambling. So I did something risky. I agreed with her. I said she was right and I had been struggling. I said the stress of keeping secrets was culling me. I said I wanted to tell my dad everything. She looked suspicious, but also intrigued. She asked what secrets I meant. I said she knew what I was talking about. I told her I was tired of pretending. I said we should tell my dad the truth about everything. About the shellfish and the bracelet and Christmas night. Her face went hard. She said no one would believe me. She said I had no proof of anything. She said my dad would choose her story over mine. I said maybe she was right, but I had to try. I said living like this was making me sick. I said I'd rather be sent away than keep playing these games. She studied me for a long moment. Then she said we should talk about this over dinner. Just the two of us while my dad was at his work event. I agreed even though every instinct screamed danger, but I needed this to end one way or another. That night she made dinner and watched me eat every bite. She kept filling my glass with water and insisting I drink. The food tasted normal, but I stayed alert. After dinner, she suggested we have dessert in the living room. She brought out a chocolate cake she'd made special. She cut me a huge piece and watched me eat. Halfway through, I started feeling dizzy. Not sick exactly, but off balance. The room tilted and I grabbed the couch for support. Lydia leaned forward and asked if I was okay. Her voice sounded far away. I tried to answer, but my words came out slurred. She said I looked tired. She said maybe I should lie down. She helped me to the couch and I couldn't resist. My limbs felt heavy and useless. As I lay there unable to move, she sat beside me. She said this was for the best. She said my dad would come home to find me passed out with empty med bottles nearby. She said she'd tell him I'd been stealing her anxiety medication. She said combined with my paranoid notebook, it would be clear I needed immediate help. She already had brochures ready for a place in Utah. She said they specialized in troubled teens with substance issues. She said I'd be gone by morning. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. She patted my head like I was a dog. She said my dad would be sad, but ultimately relieved. She said I'd been such a burden lately. Then she made a mistake. She kept talking. She told told me how she'd planned this from the beginning, how she knew I was weak and easy to manipulate, how my dad was so desperate for love he'd believe anything. She said Christmas was supposed to break me. She thought I'd run away or do something stupid. She never expected me to fight back in front of her friends. She said hitting me was impulsive but worked out perfectly. She knew I'd be too scared to tell anyone. She knew my dad would take her side if I tried. She talked about the shellfish and how careful she'd been with doses, just enough to make me sick but not enough to cause real damage. She said it was almost too easy. She even admitted to planting the bracelet. She laughed about how I walked right into that trap. She said my face when they found it was priceless. What she didn't know was that I'd been recording on my phone the whole time. I'd started it before dinner and hidden it behind a pillow. Everything she said was being captured. She also didn't know I'd barely eaten the cake. I'd learned her tricks by then. I'd pushed most of it around my plate and hidden chunks in my napkin. Whatever she drugged me with, I only got a small dose. So I played along. I let my eyes close and my breathing slow. I stayed limp as she checked my pulse and lifted my eyelids. When she left to get the med bottles, I forced myself up. My legs shook, but I could walk. I grabbed my phone and checked the recording. Crystal clear. I heard her coming back, so I lay down again. She arranged the pills around me and took photos. She even put some in my hand for effect. Then she called my dad. She cried and said she found me unconscious. She said there were pills everywhere and she didn't know what to do. She begged him to come home. While we waited, she sat there watching me. Every few minutes, she'd check if I was still breathing. She seemed almost disappointed that I was. When my dad burst through the door, she ran to him sobbing. She said she'd tried to wake me, but I wouldn't respond. She said she found the empty bottles and panicked. He rushed over and shook me gently. I pretended to wake up slowly. I acted confused and groggy. I asked what happened. Lydia said I'd taken her pills. She said she found me like this and called him immediately. She showed him the bottles with her name on them. My dad asked me if it was true. I said I didn't remember taking anything. I said the last thing I knew we were eating cake. Lydia jumped in and said I'd been acting strange all night. She said I kept talking about wanting to disappear. She said she should have seen the signs. That's when I pulled out my phone. I said I had something they both needed to hear. Lydia tried to grab it, but I held tight. I played the recording. Her whole confession filled the room, every horrible detail in her own voice. My dad's face went from confused to shocked to furious. When it ended, the silence was deafening. Lydia stood there with her mouth open. Then she started stammering about how I'd tricked her. She said I'd manipulated her into saying those things. She said I'd drugged myself to frame her. She said my dad couldn't possibly believe such an obvious setup, but my dad wasn't listening to her anymore. He looked at me and asked if I was really okay. I nodded and showed him the pictures I'd taken of her shellfish powder stash. I told him about the months of poisoning, about the planted bracelet and the deleted voicemails, about Christmas night and how she'd hit me. He sank into a chair like all the strength left his body. He asked Lydia if it was true. He begged her to tell him I was lying. Instead, she turned on him. She said he was pathetic for believing me. She said I had him wrapped around my finger. She said he was too weak to see what a burden I was. She said she'd done everything for him. She'd tried to give him a perfect life. She said all I did was cause problems and he was too blind to see it. She said she should have sent me away months ago. She said she had the paperwork ready and the place picked out. She said one phone call and I'd be gone. My dad stood up slowly. His voice was quiet but firm when he told her to leave. She laughed and said it was her house too. He said not anymore. He said she had an hour to pack what she could carry. He said if she wasn't gone by then, he'd call the police and play them the recording. She tried to argue, but he wouldn't budge. She tried tears, but he turned away. Finally, she grabbed her purse and stomped upstairs. We could hear her throwing things and cursing. She came down with 2 suitcases and stood in the doorway. She looked at me with pure hatred. She said this wasn't over. She said I'd regret ruining her life. Then she left and slammed the door so hard the windows shook. My dad and I sat in silence for a while. Then he pulled me into the tightest hug. He apologized over and over. He said he should have protected me better. I told him it wasn't his fault. I said Lydia was good at manipulation. I said she fooled both of us for a long time. We spent the rest of the night talking. I told him everything I'd been through. He cried when he heard about the hitting and the poisoning. He said he'd change the locks in the morning. He said he'd file for divorce immediately. He said she'd never come near us again, and he kept his word. Lydia tried calling and texting, but he blocked her number. She sent letters, but he threw them away unopened. She even showed up once, but he threatened to call the police. The divorce was messy but quick. She tried to claim I'd assaulted her, but the recording destroyed her credibility. She ended up with way less than she wanted and had to move back with her sister. My dad and I grew closer than ever. He started coming to my school events and actually listening when I talked. He said he'd learned his lesson about putting anyone before family. I still have the recording saved in 3 different places, just in case Lydia ever tries anything again. But mostly I try not to think about her. Sometimes I wonder if I should have seen it coming sooner. All those little comments and weird looks. But I was just a kid who wanted a family. Now I know better. I know that family isn't about blood or marriage certificates. It's about people who actually care about your well-being. My dad and I are doing great now. We have pizza nights and watch bad movies together. He even helped me apply to colleges without anyone trying to sabotage it. As for Lydia, I heard she moved to another state, probably looking for another family to terrorize. I feel sorry for whoever she targets next, but that's their problem now. I've got my dad and my friends and my whole future ahead of me, and no one's gonna poison my food or gaslight me ever again. So yeah, that's basically how everything went down with Lydia. But I guess I should mention what happened after because people always ask if she really stayed away. She didn't. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I started noticing weird stuff again. Nothing major at first, just little things that made me nervous. Like I'd see a car that looked like hers parked down the street, or I'd get calls from unknown numbers that would hang up when I answered. Sometimes I'd hear breathing on the other end before the click. My dad said I was being paranoid, and maybe I was. But then Madison saw her at the grocery store near our house. Lydia was supposed to be living 2 states away with her sister. I started being extra careful again. I'd check the locks twice before bed and look over my shoulder when walking to my car. My dad installed security cameras just to make me feel better. He put them at every entrance and even got one of those video doorbells. Then one day I came home from school and found a package on the porch. No return address, but my name written in familiar handwriting. My stomach dropped. I brought it inside and opened it carefully. Inside was a photo album filled with pictures of our family, but in every single photo my face had been scratched out with something sharp. The scratches were deep, tearing through the photo paper. There was a note that said she was thinking of me. That's it. Just that creepy message in her perfect cursive writing. I showed my dad and he finally took it seriously. We went to the police, but they said without proof it was from her they couldn't do much. They suggested we document everything and call if she made actual contact. suspect. So we waited and watched. The cameras didn't catch anything useful. The weird calls continued, but we couldn't trace them. I felt like I was going crazy again. Then Lydia made a mistake. She showed up at my school. I was walking to my car after drama practice when I saw her. She was standing by the fence just watching me. When our eyes met, she smiled and waved like we were old friends. I froze for a second, then ran back inside. I found the security guard and told him my dad's ex-wife was stalking me. He went out to check, but she was already gone. But the school had cameras. They caught her clear as day standing there for 20 minutes before I came out. Finally, we had proof she was violating the restraining order my dad had gotten. The police took it seriously this time. They went to her sister's house, but of course Lydia wasn't there. Her sister claimed she hadn't seen her in weeks. We found out later that Lydia had been staying in a motel just outside town. She'd been there for almost a month watching us and planning who knows what. The motel clerk said she'd paid in cash and kept to herself. The police picked her up that night. She tried to say she was just passing through and wanted to see how I was doing. She said she meant no harm and missed her family, but the judge didn't buy it. Between the scratched photos and the school footage and her history, she got 6 months in jail. My dad and I both testified about everything she'd put us through. She looked different in court, smaller somehow without her expensive clothes and perfect makeup. She kept staring at me while I talked about the poisoning and the hitting. When it was her turn to speak, she cried and said I'd ruined her life. She said all she wanted was a happy family and I destroyed it out of jealousy. Even then, she couldn't admit what she'd done. The 6 months passed pretty quickly. My dad and I actually started to relax again. I stopped checking over my shoulder and he stopped jumping every time the doorbell rang. I was getting ready for graduation and picking a college. My dad was so proud when I got into my top choice with a partial scholarship. Things were really good. Then Lydia got out. We knew the exact date, so we were prepared. My dad took time off work and we installed extra locks. We even stayed with my uncle for a few days just to be safe. But nothing happened. Days turned into weeks with no sign of her. We heard from her sister that she'd moved to Florida to start over. Maybe it was really done. I went to prom and graduated with honors. My dad cried during the ceremony, which was embarrassing, but also kind of sweet. We had a little party at the house with family and friends. That night, after everyone left, I was cleaning up when I found an envelope under my windshield wiper. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a graduation card, the generic kind you buy at the drugstore. But the message inside was all Lydia. She congratulated me on graduating and wished me luck in college. She said she was proud of how strong I'd become. At the bottom, she wrote that she'd always think of me as the daughter she never had. She signed it with a little heart. I showed my dad and we called the police again. But a card wasn't enough for them to do anything. She hadn't threatened me or tried to make contact beyond leaving it on my car. We never saw her again after that. I went to college 3 hours away and lived in the dorms. My dad sold the house and bought a condo downtown. We both needed fresh starts. I'm in my junior year now studying psychology, probably because of everything that happened with Lydia. I want to understand what makes people like her tick. My professors say I have good insights in our abnormal psych classes. My dad's doing great too. He started dating a nice woman from his office. I was worried at first, but she's nothing like Lydia. She actually listens when I talk and never makes weird comments about my clothes. Sometimes I Google Lydia's name just to see if anything comes up. So far, nothing bad. I found her Facebook once, but it was all private. Her profile picture was her and some new guy at a beach. I wonder if she told him about us. Probably not. She probably painted herself as the victim of a bitter stepdaughter and a weak ex-husband. I feel sorry for him. My therapist says I need to stop checking up on her. She says it's not healthy to keep tabs on someone who hurt me. She's probably right, but it's hard to let go completely. I still have trust issues, especially with older women. My dad's girlfriend is great, but I catch myself analyzing everything she says, looking for hidden meanings that probably aren't there. And I still can't eat certain foods. Anything with shellfish makes me nauseous even though I know it's safe. Some scars take longer to heal than others. But overall, I'm doing really well. I have good friends and decent grades and a dad who actually pays attention now. That's more than a lot of people get. I know Lydia's out there somewhere probably making someone else miserable, but that's not my problem anymore. I survived her and came out stronger. The recording is still saved on multiple devices just in case. Call me paranoid, but I like having that insurance. You never know when someone from your past might show up again. My advice to anyone dealing with a toxic step-parent or anyone really is to document everything. Keep records and save texts and make recordings when you can. Don't let them gaslight you into thinking you're crazy. And tell someone. I waited way too long because I thought I was protecting my dad, but secrets only help the abuser. Speaking up is what saved me in the end. Oh, and trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Your instincts exist for a reason. Anyway, that's my story. It's been 3 years since that night with the cake and the recording. 3 years since I got my dad back and my life back. I still have nightmares sometimes. I dream that I'm back in that house and she's making dinner. I know there's poison in it, but I can't stop eating. I wake up gasping and check my phone to make sure the recording is still there. But mostly I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I'm free and safe and building a life she can't touch. That's the best revenge I could ask for. My dad and I are closer than ever. We talk almost every day, even with me being away at school. He sends me care packages with my favorite snacks and silly cards that make me laugh. We don't talk about Lydia much anymore. She's like a bad dream we both had. Sometimes I'll make a joke about checking my food and he'll laugh nervously, but mostly we've moved on. I hope she has too, honestly. I hope she got help and figured out why she needed to hurt people. I hope whoever she's with now is safe. But if they're not, if she's up to her old tricks, I hope they're smarter than we were. I hope they see through her faster and get out before real damage is done. That's all I've got. Thanks for reading this whole mess. It feels good to get it all out there, even if it's just to strangers on the internet. Stay safe out there, everyone. And seriously check your food if something tastes weird. You never know who might be trying to poison you. Kidding, sort of.